When there's no future, how can there be sin? We're the flowers in the dustbin. We're the poison in your human machine. We're the future. Your future. God save the Queen. Hi there. Welcome back to another episode of The Greatest Record Ever Made. I'm Carl Caffarelli, the co-host of This Is Rock and Roll Radio with Dana and Carl, heard every Sunday night from 9 to midnight Eastern on WSPJ in Syracuse, 103.3, 93.7 FM, and on the web at sparksyracuse.org. I'm also a writer, and I'm working on a book called The Greatest Record Ever Made, Volume 1, dedicated to the notion that an infinite number of songs can each be the greatest record ever made as long as they take turns. And records, turns, you know the drill by now. This week, the spotlight falls on God Save the Queen by the Sex Pistols. I cannot overstate the impact that record and that movement of punk in the 70s had on me as a teenager. I was a senior in high school, 1976, 1977, when I first heard of punk. Probably in 76, there were these news reports of this shocking group in England called the Sex Pistols, who, it was said, vomited on their audience, which was ridiculous and also not true. I wasn't interested. It seemed silly. It didn't seem edgy or relevant to me at all. I mean, I like shock rock a little bit. I liked Alice Cooper. I loved Alice Cooper. I saw my first concert in December of 1976, which was Kiss with Uriah Heep. Loved Kiss. Still do. So punk, at least on its face, wasn't an immediate sell for me. It just seemed weird and not necessarily in a good way. There's good weird. This didn't seem like it was going to be for me. That changed in 1977. There was a tabloid magazine called Phonograph Record Magazine, which I had not heard of before. And WOUR-FM in nearby Utica was sponsoring free copies of this. You go to any participating Gerber Music location in the area malls and you snap yourself up a copy of the latest issue of Phonograph Record Magazine. And this magazine was a revelation to me because this is where I developed my interest in punk rock. I just was fascinated by the stories of this exciting underground music that I knew nothing about. Punk was a broader parameter then than what we recognize now. Punk at that time included Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. It included television. It included Blondie. And also, obviously, it included the Sex Pistols and the Ramones and the Damned and all of that rougher ilk, if you will. But I was fascinated, even though I had not heard it. I was instantly intrigued, titillated, fascinated, but not with any path forward, because this certainly wasn't getting played on the radio, and I wasn't going to hear it. There was no YouTube at the time. I had switched radio allegiances from my cherished top 40 AM radio. I've been listening to WNDR and WOLF for most of my life, certainly throughout the 70s up to that point. And I started listening more and more to WOUR-FM out of Utica, which I just mentioned, because they were more adventurous. I just was getting disillusioned and disenfranchised by what was on top 40 AM radio at the time. I had no use for Heaven on the Seventh Floor or Undercover Angel or any of that stuff. Where WOUR was playing a mix of old stuff and new stuff. They had a killer Friday Night Oldies show, and they played the Dave Clark Five and the Yardbirds, first place I ever remember hearing the Yardbirds. I had recently become a fan of the Kinks, and they were playing both old Kinks and newer Kinks, from Schoolboys in Disgrace from a few years prior, and then in 77, the new Kinks album, Sleepwalker, all on WOUR. And they were also playing the Rubinoos, and Michael Nesmith, and Greg Kinn, and Graham Parker, all this stuff seeping into my consciousness as part of my everyday soundtrack. I was not necessarily estranged from everything that was popular in 77. I was 17, and I liked Fleetwood Mac. I liked Boston. I liked Carry On Wayward Son by Kansas. I don't know if I was quite on to hating the Eagles yet, but it soon enough. It would come soon enough. Why put these things off? The Rubinoos were getting airplay on WOUR, and I was a big fan instantly. And then in the summer of 77, the summer between my senior year in high school and the fall of my freshman year in college, WOUR played the new Sex Pistols 45, God Save the Queen. And I was just hypnotized by it. I remember writing in my journal at the time something to the effect that this isn't music, but it's amazing. Later on, I would revise that opinion. I do think it's music. I actually think it's very well performed rock and roll music by a crack rock and roll group that does not get the credit it deserves. People only remember the outrage and the anger and the sensational aspects of the Sex Pistols. They were a pretty damn good rock and roll band. They were very, very good. I would kill to hear a band like that right now. As I got to college in Brockport that fall, late August, I started peppering the college radio station WBSU with requests so they could hear more punk rock. I wanted to hear the Ramones. I wanted to hear the Sex Pistols, the Damned, Blondie, Television, Patti Smith, Dictators, who were kind of old wave but still part of the punk environment. And I gradually got my wish. I started hearing more and more of it, and I was just all in. I was all in for punk and British Invasion from the '60s and the Monkees. It might seem like an odd grouping, but that was my music when I was 17, and to a large degree, it's certainly a big part of my music today at the age of 60. Some things don't get old, even as we do. Sometime in the fall of '77, I made my first punk rock record purchases at a record store called the Record Grove in Brockport, which was run by the late great Bill Yerger, who later went on to start his own store, Main Street Records, which loomed large in my legend. And I bought 2 45s there, my initiation into punk rock. I bought this one. We'll be coming back to talk about that in the future video. Oh, rest assured. And I bought the one you saw at the top of the video, God Save the Queen by the Sex Pistols. And it lived up to my memory. I had only heard it once on WUR that summer. I had not had an opportunity to hear it again since then. It was just as riveting, more riveting on the second time, the third time, the 20th time, as I played it over and over again. The B-side, Did You Know Wrong, was also pretty good. That turned out to be a non-album side. But God Save the Queen was just incredible. I had a girlfriend at school, Teresa, who did not care for my choice of music, but she was rather fond of me. So for Christmas, she bought me this. The musical environment at Brockport was not necessarily conducive to punk rock, to an interest in the Sex Pistols or the Ramones and all that. It was primarily a Southern rock, Grateful Dead school. The school newspaper, The Stylist, reviewed the Nevermind the Bollocks album, and I remember the line so clearly from the review. Plainly put, this record sucks. Oh, you and your clever words. I disagreed. It was an amazing record that has grown more interesting to me over time. I'm not sure that I really appreciated how good the Sex Pistols were at the time. It was the angry clatter caught me. I was a suburban white kid from the suburbs. What did I have to be angry about? But I had never heard angry music before that. Alice Cooper wasn't angry. The Kiss wasn't angry. Even Bob Dylan didn't really portray his anger. Protest music didn't really succumb to its anger. It protested, but it did it politely. The Sex Pistols were anger, cathartic anger. I was just floored by how great this stuff was. I like Pretty Vacant. I love God Save the Queen, Holidays in the Sun, an album track called No Feelings. Amazing, amazing stuff that people should give more credit to. It wasn't just the hype. It wasn't just the sensationalism of the sensational Sex Pistols. It was good. Scratch that. It was great rock and roll music. I was all in for punk. I went digging to see if I could find my old Sex Pistols t-shirt, even though it hasn't fit me in decades. I was going to pull it out, but I must have gotten rid of it. I still have some of my old t-shirts from the time. And although I've lost about 20, 25 pounds in pandemic, I still can't dream of getting into these. Or this. Or even this, which was a custom job, because I missed out on a chance to get the original. And kind of my generic punk shirt, which isn't really punk except that I decided it was. I think isn't that what punk's all about? You decide that it's punk. You decide that it's you, and that's all that matters. You don't care about a ruling from outside. Teresa had given me the Sex Pistols album for Christmas. We broke up over Christmas break. No future for us. The Sex Pistols broke up not long after that too. They broke up in January of 1978. They gave their last concert in San Francisco at the Winter. I'm blanking on the name of the place. Somebody will correct me in the comments. My friend Greg Agaria was there, and it was a disaster. The original band wasn't the original band anymore. Glenn Matlock, the original bass player, was long gone from the group by then. He'd been replaced by Sid Vicious, who could not play. Steve Jones, the guitarist, Paul Cook, the drummer, and original bassist Glenn Matlock were a tight band. They weren't the same without Matlock. They certainly weren't the same with Sid Vicious. Johnny Rotten in front was the focal point, always was, probably always will be. Willfully obnoxious, and not what I'm referring to when I talk about how tight the band was. You either like Johnny Rotten or you don't like Johnny Rotten. I fall resolutely in the middle. I love him as a Sex Pistol. I like the first Public Image single. Haven't really had much interest in him since, specifically. But, you know, he was important to me when he had to be important to me. The Pistols broke up. I became an unrepentant fan of all of this stuff. Punk, power pop, which might seem a stretch, but power pop was part of that approach. The Ramones were a power pop group. The Jam, punk group from England, they were a power pop group. Generation X, featuring future star Billy Idol, they were a power pop group. It would be a stretch to call the Sex Pistols power pop, but there was pop in that music, and it was powerful. It was great, great rock and roll music. Did it have a future? The singer's protestations notwithstanding, yeah, there was a future. It was timeless. Now, the Sex Pistols in their day were a threat to the status quo, more than any other band in recent memory, but they were not even close to the greatest threat that the pop music status quo, the establishment, had ever seen. The greatest threat to norms, to civil society, ever provided by pop music, came back in the 50s, and that was Elvis Presley. Elvis is going to be the subject of our next edition of The Greatest Record Ever Made next week, as we discuss Heartbreak Hotel by King Elvis I. I thank you for joining us today for this reminiscence on the Sex Pistols and God Save the Queen. Down below, you can see links to support, subscribe, tip. I will put a link to the early version of the Sex Pistols chapter in the book. It's not much different now. I changed a few things, but you get the gist of it. And I thank you for joining us. We mean it, man. Thank you for joining us on The Greatest Record Ever Made.